January 1943, Stalingrad. A frozen cellar beneath a ruined apartment block. A German lieutenant shivers in his greatcoat, listening to the distant artillery. His hand rests on a captured PPSh-41 submachine gun, its wooden stock warm against his palm. The weapon looks crude, almost primitive in its construction, rough welds, simple stampings, a drum magazine that seems comically oversized at 71 rounds. Yet this 7.62mm weapon, firing at 900 rounds per minute, has already killed 3 of his men in the last hour. The Soviet soldier who carried it probably died before emptying half the magazine. The German knows this gun represents something terrifying. Not superior German engineering, but Soviet industrial ruthlessness. A weapon designed not for precision or beauty, but for overwhelming numbers and brutal efficiency. This was the PPSh-41, the submachine gun that flooded the Eastern Front. It was cheap to produce, simple to operate, and devastating at close quarters. And it forced German soldiers to completely rethink their tactical doctrine. The problem was brutally simple. By the summer of 1941, the Soviet Union faced an existential crisis. Operation Barbarossa had torn through the western reaches of the country, encircling and annihilating entire Soviet armies. In the first 6 months of the invasion, the Red Army lost over 4 million soldiers, most of them captured or killed. The material losses were staggering: 20,000 tanks, over 100,000 artillery pieces, and more than 3 million small arms. Factories in Ukraine, Belarus, and Western Russia were either captured or destroyed in the rapid German advance. The Red Army was being re-equipped with whatever could be salvaged, while simultaneously fighting a war of survival on a front stretching over 2,000 miles. The Soviet Union did not just need more weapons, it needed a new philosophy of weapons production, one that could withstand the loss of its industrial heartland and still outproduce the enemy. The pre-war PPD-40 submachine gun, while effective, was a peacetime weapon. Each unit required over 13 kilograms of milled steel and 7.3 hours of skilled machining on complex tools, resources the Soviets no longer had in abundance. They needed a weapon that could be built by teenagers and women in workshops that had been making tractors just weeks before. The engineering constraints were unforgiving. Soviet designers faced an impossible trinity. The weapon had to be reliable in the brutal cold of Russian winters and the choking dust of its summers, simple enough for a conscripted peasant with minimal training to field strip and maintain, yet lethal enough to stop the battle-hardened Wehrmacht. Early Soviet submachine guns like the PPD-40 were well made but too complex for mass production. The German MP-40 was an excellent weapon, but its receiver was fabricated from solid steel blocks using precision milling machines, a process that consumed precious machine tool hours and generated significant scrap metal. The American Thompson was reliable but heavy and expensive, machined from solid billets in a process so costly it was nicknamed the trench broom by Cadillac. The British Sten was simple, made from stamped metal and tubing, but suffered from reliability issues and a reputation for accidental discharges that made soldiers wary. Georgy Shpagin, the designer, understood that the solution was not refinement, but radical simplification. His design reduced the number of machined parts from 87 in the PPD-40 to just 14 in the PPSh-41. The receiver was no longer milled but constructed from a simple stamped metal tube, welded together. The barrel was produced from whatever steel could be sourced, sometimes even salvaged from damaged artillery pieces. The furniture was carved from cheap, abundant birchwood. The trade-off was absolute. Precision, finish, and ergonomic refinement were sacrificed for production speed and sheer, overwhelming numbers. The logic seemed bulletproof. A soldier with a crude weapon that fires is infinitely more valuable than a soldier with a perfect weapon that does not. The PPSh-41 operated on the simplest of principles: straight blowback. When the trigger was pulled, the firing pin struck the primer of the 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev cartridge. The expanding gas pressure drove the empty casing backward, pushing the bolt with it against the force of a stout return spring. There was no locking mechanism, no delayed blowback, no complex gas piston system, just raw, mechanical simplicity. As the bolt travelled rearward, it extracted and ejected the spent case, then, driven forward by the spring, stripped a fresh round from the magazine and chambered it, cocking the hammer for the next shot. The weapon could fire in 2 modes: semi-automatic with each trigger pull firing one round, and fully automatic where it would cycle at approximately 900 rounds per minute until the trigger was released or the magazine was empty. The Tokarev round itself was brutally effective for its purpose. A small, high-velocity pistol cartridge firing a 110-grain bullet at over 500 meters per second. It could penetrate the German steel helmets used at the start of the war, light body armour, and the wooden walls of buildings at ranges up to 100 meters. The complete weapon weighed only 3.6 kilograms with its iconic drum magazine, was 843 millimeters long, and had an effective range of 100 to 150 meters. The drum magazine, a holdover from the PPD-40, held 71 rounds, giving the PPSh-41 a firepower advantage over almost every other submachine gun of the era. A simpler 35-round box magazine was later introduced, easier to carry and load, but it never replaced the drum in the popular imagination. Most remarkably, the PPSh-41 could be manufactured in just 2.7 hours per unit. By 1945, Soviet factories would produce over 6 million of them, with some plants like the Zavod imeni Molotova in Izhevsk reaching outputs of 3,000 per day. The PPSh-41 emerged from the Soviet Union's desperate wartime industrial system, a creation born of necessity and political will. Georgy Shpegin, a self-taught weapons designer with little formal education, submitted his design to the State Defense Committee, the GKO, in September 1941 as German forces closed on Moscow. The Soviet weapons establishment, including the NKVD-controlled weapons factories, immediately recognized its potential. The design was approved for production in November 1941, just weeks before the German advance on the capital was halted. The decision was driven by the highest levels of government. Stalin himself had demanded that the people give everything for the front, everything for victory. Factories that had been producing everything from automobiles to agricultural equipment were converted to PPSh-41 production in a matter of days. Entire factories deemed too valuable to risk capture were dismantled, loaded onto trains, and relocated east of the Ural Mountains, often reassembling in open fields or crude workshops in the dead of winter. The weapon's simplicity meant it could be produced not just in these massive industrial plants, but also in small workshops, clandestine factories, and even by partisan groups operating behind German lines. The Soviet leadership understood that this was more than a weapon. It was a tool of industrial warfare, a physical manifestation of the doctrine of quantity over quality. The PPSh-41 proved its worth in the brutal close-quarters combat of Stalingrad. In one documented engagement from December 1942, a single Soviet infantry company from the 13th Guards Rifle Division, armed almost exclusively with PPSh-41s, held a multi-story apartment building known as the Pavlov's House, against repeated German assaults for 59 days. The Germans, armed primarily with Kar-98K bolt-action rifles and a limited number of MP-40s, were consistently outgunned in the confined spaces of the ruined city. The Soviet soldiers could fire 71 rounds without needing to reload, creating a near-continuous wall of lead that German soldiers, in their after-action reports, called the Russian typewriter for its distinctive chattering sound. A German officer's diary from the period reads, "We advance room by room. Each doorway is a death trap. The moment we enter, a storm of lead erupts, not from one gun, but from many. They do not aim, they simply saturate the space." In another instance, during the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, Soviet anti-tank crews equipped with PPSh-41s successfully defended their positions against German infantry assaults, using the high rate of fire to suppress the enemy while they reloaded their main anti-tank guns. The weapon's effectiveness was not in its precision. Few soldiers could effectively control it beyond 50 meters when firing fully automatic, but in its ability to dominate an environment with sheer volume of fire. The PPSh-41 was not without its failures. The drum magazine, while impressive in capacity, was heavy, weighing almost 2 kilograms when fully loaded, and cumbersome in the tight confines of a trench or a foxhole. Its spring was notoriously finicky. If not loaded correctly with a special tool, the feed lips could misalign, causing constant jams. The weapon's high rate of fire meant inexperienced soldiers could exhaust their 71-round magazine in less than 5 seconds of continuous fire, a fatal mistake in a firefight. The simple sights were only marginally effective beyond 100 meters, and the weapon was virtually useless at ranges over 200 meters, where its bullets lost velocity and accuracy. The birchwood stock, while durable, was prone to warping and cracking in the extreme weather conditions of the Eastern Front, from the 40 below zero cold of winter to the baking heat of summer. Perhaps most critically, the weapon's fully automatic-only design in early models encouraged wasteful fire, particularly among poorly trained conscripts who lacked the discipline for short, controlled bursts. German soldiers who captured PPSh-41s often removed the drum magazines in favour of their own MP40 magazines, which they could adapt with simple modifications, a testament to the drum's practical flaws. The weapon's simplicity also meant it lacked the refinement of German submachine guns. Its trigger pull was heavy and inconsistent, and its balance was poor compared to the ergonomic MP40. Despite these limitations, the PPSh-41's advantages in production numbers and close-range effectiveness were considered more valuable than its shortcomings. The PPSh-41 didn't win the war alone. It filled a crucial gap in Soviet small arms doctrine, complementing the long-range accuracy of the Mosin-Nagant rifle and the sustained fire of the DP-28 light machine gun. Soviet tactical doctrine evolved around the capabilities of their weapons. Riflemen provided accurate fire at longer ranges, light machine guns delivered sustained fire at medium ranges, and submachine gunners delivered overwhelming firepower at close range. This layered approach allowed Soviet forces to adapt to different tactical situations without requiring hyper-specialized weapons for each role. The PPSh-41 was particularly effective in urban combat, trench warfare, and dense forest environments where engagements typically occurred at ranges under 100 meters. German soldiers quickly learned to fear these environments when facing Soviet forces, as their tactical advantage in long-range, aimed fire was completely negated. The weapon also had significant psychological effects. Its distinctive sound, high rate of fire, and sheer numbers created an impression of overwhelming Soviet firepower that often preceded the actual engagement. German soldiers sometimes reported hearing what sounded like dozens of machine guns, when in fact it was just a few squads of PPSh-41 armed soldiers firing in coordinated bursts. This psychological pressure, this sound of the Red Army, became a weapon in itself, eroding German morale long before the actual assault hit their lines. The German command was so alarmed that they began fielding their own high-capacity magazine experiments, like the MP40 Tum-2 with its dual magazines, a direct but ultimately unsuccessful response to the PPSh-41's volume of fire. The PPSh-41 outlived its creator and the war that birthed it. Over 6 million were produced, with examples still found in conflicts decades later. North Korean and Chinese forces used variants, including the Type 50, during the Korean War, where they again faced American soldiers in close-range battles. Soviet satellite states continued manufacturing them into the 1950s. Today, museums and private collections preserve these crude but effective weapons, their rough finishes and simple construction telling a story of industrial desperation turned tactical advantage. The PPSh-41 proved that in total war, industrial ruthlessness can overcome engineering sophistication. It demonstrated that a weapon designed for mass production could be more valuable than one designed for perfect performance. The Germans hated the PPSh-41 not because it was superior to their weapons in quality, but because it represented a system that could produce 3 crude submachine guns for every one. Precision German weapon, a system that could afford to lose 10 soldiers and their guns to kill 1 German soldier and his. In the mathematics of total war, that was a calculation the Germans could not win. The philosophy behind the PPSh-41 did not die in 1945. It lived on, directly influencing the design of the AK-47, which adopted a similar ethos of simplicity, reliability, and mass producibility. The PPSh-41 was more than a submachine gun. It was an industrial policy, a tactical doctrine, and a psychological weapon, all forged in steel and stamped into history. Obsolete is a word for peacetime. In total war, there is only what can be produced in millions and what cannot.